Hello, and welcome to today's Praxist Table Talks. Tonight is a long overdue episode regarding Cody's trip to the Scyldings event. The event was hosted in June, and we are now recording this in August, so quite a bit of time has passed since then. And so what we really want to focus on tonight is the event itself, Cody's hopes for the event, and then what has come from it. So without further ado, we are your hosts. My name is Vincent. I'm the founder of Praxia. This is Cody, member of our leadership council. How are you today?
Doing great. You're getting much better at the introductions. You know, it's only been a year and a half since we started this.
Only.
But yes, welcome back. I guess you might be welcoming us back, whoever's listening, because it has been a while.
It has.
But we're busy men, try to get a lot done in our personal lives, and as nice as it is for the podcast and everything else to have such media outreach, that isn't the goal of Praxia. So that's why a lot of this gets put on the back burner sometimes, because we have more pressing matters at hand. So I think everyone can forgive us for that.
Absolutely.
Especially given the fruits that have been born out of the Scyldings event in particular.
And I think that a lot of time has been taken up by necessity from the things that have resulted from that event. So I actually did not have the pleasure of going. I regret not being able to go, but next year I do hope to. So but this Scyldings event in particular seemed like it was very fruitful from what you've told me off call, and just from what I've seen result on from people on YouTube who have posted their kind of reflections and things like that. It seems like it's been pretty fruitful in regards to what's come out of it and the trajectories that have been set by people in the event having taken action on what it is they promised to do at the event. So I guess before we get into it, I know you made that video, but I just wanted to know, what were your initial expectations of the Scyldings event, and then how did it live up to these expectations?
So my initial expectations were, like I said, building that sort of stone citadel to encapsulate our visions for the future and find ourselves in a more directed and unified front. Because issue with people on our end of things, if you want to call it the right or dissidents or whatever, we even have just an issue naming ourselves.
Yeah.
It's because of our disagreeable natures, and that's just us, pushing the bounds of, discourse, and pushing the bounds of all aspects of life. We are adventurous, virile men, and some women, some of the few women, the five of them that attended the event, but we'll get into that in a moment. But mostly
five.
men, because we're 5.5, counting Yiz, which she was a pleasure to meet as well. But because of that friction amongst personalities, since we all do have our own egos and super egos thereof, and own personal projects that we want to set our sights on and get done, there's always this difficulty in cooperating and having proper corroboration in the overlap of our goals. But I guess one of the very first things in getting right into the event is me stepping through the doors for the first time and meeting some of these people, the internet anons or content creators or people that just lurk and try to contribute in their own means in their own personal lives. Meeting so many of them for the first time was a genuine breath of fresh air, because any animosity that might have existed amongst any of them all dissipates once you actually meet them in person, see their face, shake their hand, and actually start talking like men, like we're supposed to, and not live in this digital... I was just watching a stream on with Endeavor and Vox Populi and American Krogan, and they were speaking on these terms of being stuck in the metaverse. And it really is that case where so many of us are stuck in this online paradigm. But having something like the Scyldings event, or like basket weaving, or like the projects that we have for Praxia, sometime down the line, is getting things in real life, getting things physical, and getting things a more tangible reality. Sorry to all of those who are the Gnostics and the demiurge and all that. Physical reality is a lie, but too bad. This is the hand we were dealt, so we're gonna do the best we can with it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
my first impression was genuinely refreshing.
I 100% agree, especially with that. We are kind of, what's the term? Trapped, I guess. What's funny is that the whole demiurge thing applies to the online world, I think. We are
Absolutely.
kind of trapped
Absolutely.
into this digital pod, or like you said, kind of this metaverse of information that is not in any way spiritual or even sentimental. People become these images on screens, these, macros or their profile pictures or whatever. It becomes very easy to degrade them and hate them for one thing they might have said, which all, like you said, animosity becomes absent once you meet these people in person. And, these...
Just completely anonymous, inhuman pixels of light on a screen.
Exactly. And it's almost like, you don't know who you're interacting with on the other end of that screen either. So it becomes very easy to, hurtle insults at them or feel very passionately about something they might have said, which they might have, only mentioned in passing, or didn't mean to emphasize that much through text, which it also becomes very difficult to interpret.
Spurging out, as the kids would say.
Yeah. So it's, when you actually go and meet people in person, which I think needs to be the goal, it does change your perspective. And I've had the pleasure of meeting a few people in person who, with whom I share some kind of agreement very recently, and I hope to actually get into that in this episode as well. But it does change the dynamic a bit, because now you're no longer profanely raging about something on the internet, or even if you kind of attack the issue up front, walls of text on social media don't necessarily translate well into proper discussion. But when you actually sit down in front of somebody and you have a conversation about it, or you get up and talk to a group of people about it, it has a different effect, and it has a little bit more of a lasting effect too. It's one step beyond even these podcasts or these videos where you can hear our voices, or in the future see our faces, because you're right there and everything is kind of tangible. So I guess in this event, in this setting, how did it live up to your expectations of removing the shackles of online discourse?
It completely exceeded them in that regard, and all the other means of expectations I had for that video, in what I was expecting and what I was looking forward to, that was published a month and a half ago as of recording this now. Just a little bit more than a month and a half ago. It exceeded everything in every regard, and then some. There were so many extremely intelligent people that I met, and just me saying that little like right there degraded myself just a bit further, because so many of the people I met there wouldn't have even made that mistake in being articulate as they were. So many physically capable and imposing people as well. So many people that had the full range of human cognition and capability, and just personality about them to bring forth a world in which we are now just dreaming of, but with help from people like this, is looking far more like a reality than just a fantasy. And all these people working together with each other is even more hopeful for the future. So anyone who has a black pill in their mouth, or just pounds them by the daily, vomit them all up right now, because things are looking bright.
This kind of piggybacks off of our spiritual optimism video as well.
Indeed. The Kali Yuga can only last so long.
Exactly.
And we are the dying embers of a civilization, not because we've brought its ruin, but because we are the last light within it, and from that, a new fire will be born, just like the phoenix.
So, for people who have never gone to the event, how would the event play out? What can someone expect to go?
So, having the brochure in front of me right now, which is a point that one of the panels discussed, Charlemagne actually brought it up. If no one's familiar, look up Charlemagne on YouTube or Substack. He publishes for Old Glory Club or is a frequent guest on Academic Agents channel. The brochure itself here for the event was stated as a point on which institutions then see us as legitimate. Normalizations and physical things that we have to present ourselves as an organized and serious front is something as simple as just a brochure. And it is very well put together. The art on it is very nice, and it's very well organized for the 3 days that happened in the event. That was one of the first things I picked up when I walked through the door. I won't give out the location of where the event was held for security reasons in the future. I think the event was hosted there last year and might be hosted there again in the future. The staff took excellent care of us, considering there's 120 plus people at the event. And given as rowdy as we were, I think we fared fairly well with the event staff and other residents of the location on not being too rambunctious or a disturbance. So I think all around it was good in that regard. And how it went down in first walking through the doors, it was speaking to some of the people that were just setting up. One of the first people I met was Paul Fahrenheit, putting down brochures for the Old Glory Club as well. And that's a nice one, which is something that I want to address once we get down the line of speakers and topics for the event, which everyone had excellent speeches, and hopefully Vincent and or myself will be speaking at the event next year when it comes around, and hopefully contributing something beneficial and productive that everyone can kind of grab onto and drive ever forward. But speaking to Paul shortly as I did a couple times, but that first impression was very nice. Paul, fellow, good physiognomy, great guy, good energy. And then I went around to the bar area where some of the other gentlemen that were already there were hanging about. And I met Aaron McIntyre, Yiz the Eunuch, Jason Cohen, Dave the Distributist, all right off the bat, right there. And one of the funniest things that was said was from Aaron McIntyre on the very first meeting everyone. Oh, and Charlemagne was there too. Meeting everyone at first, Aaron had this point to say that, I feel like I'm getting suit because everyone was all dressed in their best, right out the gate. And it was a very well put together event, just from people personally showing up and being well kept and being the most presentable they can be, which adds again to the legitimacy of who we are and what we're representing as a movement forward for the future, for our children, for the proliferation of our civilizations and our peoples. And just simple things like dressing up or having brochures to be classy and tactful and all put together goes a very long way in not just optics, but in impression and how that sticks with people and how that might sway them without even saying a word, in agreeing with you just off of the presentation of how you present yourself.
That was one thing I was actually going to bring up, was that you had mentioned to me that everyone was kind of dressed in their best, dressed to impress and all of that. and that you wore your, I believe you said your 3-piece suit, and everybody else was kind of matching with that, which is funny because, well groomed and all of that too. It's funny because that's not the impression you would get from a bunch of people online who, talk about these kind of things.
Internet
Yeah.
racists. Yeah, you'd expect them to be all, skinheads and tatted up and the stereotypes. No.
There's a caricature there that a lot of people, think that most people adhere to. And to see these types of people in real life and to, see that they are, well-kept people, I think is a bit jarring as well. It kind of puts into perspective how serious people are about these things. And the other thing is that I think that you might, in an event like this, you're only getting the people who are the most committed as well. You're not getting the people who are, most of the people who are sitting online bitching, they are not the people who are attending this event. These people are the ones.
It was a point made in one of the speeches too, on how the Beowulf Society, the I guess parent organization for the Scyldings event, works, because they're the parent organization for Scyldings and basket weaving. It's how they operate in making sure that they can get productive people and gatekeep from having spurgs and other non-productive entities or subversive infiltrators entering in and making a muck of things. So exactly what you were saying there is something that's on some of the minds of the men leading the charge in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's what differentiates as well, because you were saying that everyone was very well spoken and all of that. It almost seems that you were with the Brahmins of our modern day little section of society, that the dissident right or whatever it might be called. You're speaking with the Brahmins of this, the highest caliber of this subset of people who are willing to have this kind of intellectual discourse and be professional about things rather than bringing up some kind of me terminology or things like that. I can imagine that there wasn't much of that there.
There was, but it was in a setting and understanding in which this is just a way we communicate within the age that we find ourselves. Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily a way in which we are defining ourselves by. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, was something that was also very refreshing, because you can have these memes, have these jokes and whatnot, and memes don't necessarily have to be some sort of shitpost, like it is what most people are used to with various apps like iFunny or pages like Reddit, where you'll find these types of more, I guess, I don't know why I'm floundering on this word, but unnecessary types of mimetics. Whereas memes, going back to the Richard Dawkins senses of coining the word, as begrudgingly as I want to use Dawkins as a source, but he is the one who coined it. Mimetics is just a way to transfer information between people by generational divides, or even super genetic sort of jumps of information. And it's something that we can observe being a demonstrative practice throughout all of human civilization. Memes existed far before the term was coined, far before the internet existed, and far before something like the Scyldings event took place. And so it's good to have many of these memes to just quickly communicate who's a friend, who is higher on a certain understanding of things, who is in the know about what needs to be done. And I think that was very well displayed at the event as well.
So I know you mentioned there was a lot of people who gave very good speeches and set the stage for things moving forward. What are some of the ones that stood out to you?
Oh, they were all great. And I'm not just saying that to, give everyone a participation trophy.
Yeah, participation trophy. I was going to say that.
It was like Vincent was mentioning. It's very much everyone of a higher caste. The genuine warriors and philosophers and priests and would be kings that were present at the event, and that may be tooting everyone's horn a little bit, but in another age, we ought to be the men running society, and that's not trying to inflate anyone's ego or be superfluous. That was the other word that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Superfluous in our hubris. Genuinely, there is a different breed of man that comes to an event like this and is organizing in the way we are, try and actually solve the issues that are being proliferated through society because of the people who currently rule it. And we are trying to genuinely cultivate a counter elite to usurp and replace them. And it's not an easy thing, especially not with all the technology we have nowadays. It makes it easier for us in some regards in communication and whatnot else, but then that puts people in that mindset of the metaverse and the online shit posting and being this anon and everything else. We need those to a certain degree. We need the foot soldiers in some aspects, but there is the counter to all of those benefits that we might have that far outweigh us in the hands of the current technocratic elite that we're up against. But because they're progressively deteriorating in their own capabilities, by their own ideological adherence, it's going to be easier and easier for us to do so.
Mm.
So it's a good thing, because it'd be far more difficult if that weren't the case.
Yeah. So I think that the stage that was set at the Scyldings event was that, or the theme of the event itself was what unites us, right? Or what's the common ground we have?
Building a common foundation for the future.
Okay.
Is the exact terms that they were using.
That makes sense. Okay. So yeah, it was building a common foundation, finding that common ground. Do you think it was successful in that regard?
Absolutely. They were, I guess, to highlight people out of order. Back of Pole was definitely a very energetic person. He was at the later end of the event. Someone I hadn't really heard of before, that I've heard of before attending the event, but I never really was into. And having met him and hear him speak, he's definitely someone I'm interested in following more and seeing more from, because of his very different approach to what his speech contained in the event. And that was in starting ventures that are grounds for challenges of the regime to be able to subvert their own rules from within by putting pressure against them in the loopholes that they create in the existing policies that they create for themselves to exploit. Sorry if that seemed like word salad, but that was the most concise way I could summarize Back of Pole's speech. And it might make it easier to bring up Cody Wilson as the person who used as the prime example of doing this, because Cody Wilson's whole idea was to start this business around 3D printing guns and distributing the source codes for those guns that people can manufacture on their own in their own houses and use them for sport or self-defense or whatever have you, whatever, make the freedom bell ring. And Cody Wilson was very smart in doing this, in knowing what legal challenges would be brought against him, knowing what optics would be brought against him, and having a counter for all of that. He was doing perfect fourth generational warfare, doing judo and jujitsu at the same time with the media and with political detractors and everyone else who was coming at him, because he understood the zeitgeist in which we live once he did try to do these things. And his mindset was to try and challenge these various legal restrictions that exist on things like firearms and rights to information and other intellectual property restrictions and things like that. And he did a very good job on it. And that's what Mike was trying to get at, is these weak points in the system exist at every level, in every sphere that they've created, whether it be in media, whether it be in certain legal policies, whether it be in higher education, whatever have you. They always have these little, as kind of calling to the first speaker of the night, or the first speaker of the event, Stephen Carson. He was speaking on things that revolve around weasel words. Going back to Mike's speech, he was describing the weasel phase of the system to get itself out of legally binding itself in a way, and telling everyone to create ventures, businesses, or just experiments in challenging the system as it is, whether as an individual or as a group basis. One, so that we're more independent on our own, but two, so that we're weakening the system or systems that we are fighting against by their own designs, and exploiting the loopholes that they've made for themselves and using them in our own fight against them, using them against themselves, as it were, holding them up to their own standards. And it was a very insightful speech, but I don't want to give too much away for any of the speeches, because there is an event book that I want to shill for the event as well. I'm going to buy myself, because some of these speeches were so, you just had to be there, essentially. And even if you were there, you want to go back and reread it and digest it more, because there was so much that so many people had to say, from someone like Dave Green to George Bagby, Warren McIntyre, just so many people that had a lot that they said, and had a lot of weight to it within every syllable. So it was a genuinely just knowledge-bearing experience in all regards.
So the book has written transcripts of the speech?
Yes, I believe transcripts and notes of all the speeches. Even though personal photography and recordings are strictly prohibited at the event, giving people's security and privacy at the utmost regard, it did film all of the speeches for record keeping. I think probably to transcribe the speeches that were given at the event, because some people didn't write speeches. Was it the Prudentialist being one of them? Him just having note cards to flip through, because he was very impressive as well as an orator. He was the first speaker in the second morning of the event. The event started on Friday, then there was Friday in the evening, then Saturday starting at 8 a.m., going to 8:40, which is the last panel for speaking, then starting again at Sunday at 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., which is when everyone was finished and time for everyone to go home. But it was a jam-packed event, and
okay, everyone, apologies for the abrupt interruption, but there was some technical issues going on with Cody's power situation. He had to change devices and everything and move on to a different phone. I believe your power is still out, correct?
Yes, but we're dedicated to the craft and making the best of every situation. So we're moving on.
So now we can kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, I think, which is that there was a lot of stuff that you had hoped would become ignited by the event, correct? Like, various trajectories would be set and people would start to take action on things. And, uniting on a common ground being the theme, or a common ground, whatever. Uniting as a common
ground works quite literally in some sense, if you want me to get into it right here.
Yeah, sure.
So, knowing where you were trying to go with trying to go with that. I guess one of the first things, like we mentioned earlier, in starting things in real life, I guess we can start with the first speech of the event as well, Stephen Carson's, which was the introduction right after Ryan Turnipseed gave the introduction and orientation, which I want to just say as a quick aside, he did an excellent job emceeing the entire event. If you haven't heard of Ryan Turnipseed before, he is a wonderful lad, a bit younger on the end of things in our sphere, but he is fighting the good fight and trying to unpause his church, get the gay out of his church, and being his own sort of modern day Martin Luther, which is funny because I believe he is Lutheran, LCMS, yeah, Lutheran something or other. But that's one of the big sticking points in his regard is fighting the good fight in that term, and working God's law, and the support and outreach that he received for doing so was in great supply at the event. But going on to Stephen Carson's speech, he spoke a lot on community and security and justice, and what we are meant to do as a people, as a movement, as organizations, to reinstate justice in society, to provide security for our families, our peoples, our progeny, therefore, and to create physical spaces that we can relax in and not be on edge like so many people are in our modern society. And that's something that I think is quite prescient, because there were many people at the event, some individuals, a couple even, or like an actual couple, a married couple, and entire organizations that are working on utilizing the property that they have, which flows into another speech that was later on in Saturday, N.D. Swans, which was talking about making a physical community somewhere in South America, much like the Brazilian town of Americana, which is comprised of expatriated Civil War veterans that fled the United States from the South after the events of the Civil War, and posing that as an idea for us to make sure that we don't have all our eggs in one basket in being persecuted by the elites at present and the systems that they hold. So there's one facet of us building things in breaking ground in the real world, but there were other people that had just large swaths of property that they wanted to develop and have a micro community working in that regard. Very Amish style way. I spoke with them quite a bit throughout the event. They were a fine couple of people. And then there was another organization called the Praxist Society, which caused a great amount of confusion because I was there with my name tag, and I still have my name tag on me, my username, my real name, and then representing the Praxist Society. And people went, "Oh, those people trying to build a philosopher king state in the Mediterranean?" I went, "No, who are they? I've never heard of them before." And so it was quite funny in that regard. But they're quite cool too. They have some backing from, I think, Peter Thiel, and he's someone who's been a big name in our spheres because he's kind of like our George Soros in a bit of a way, a bit of a mysterious billionaire, kind of funding our projects and seeing where it goes, creating our own NGOs to facilitate our ends and get the means to bring them about. But there's a lot of literal breaking of ground to achieve all of these things, and it was quite the thing to see, with people being so willing and enthusiastic to get things off the ground. And I even stood up and asked the question during, I believe it was Andy Swan's speech. Not during, but after. I hope you get the point. Where I was asking about reconquering. I even put it in the terms of a reconquista of territory, much like in places such as Detroit, where there are ghost neighborhoods or even entire ghost towns where we can identify, get a group of people to move in, reinvigorate wherever that place is, and then start generating a not a repertoire, but a similar word, generate a good standing amongst people in those places to demonstrate that we are, deserving of leadership that we're obviously demonstrating, and of greater resources to help the people, help the normies, as it were, in taking back the degeneration and decay of these great American cities or towns, or not even just American, but anywhere in the West, to reinvigorate these places that have been gutted and sent off to somewhere like China or Indonesia or India for industrial purposes, or spiritually disemboweled from the Great Replacement to the subversion of churches to anything else that might be going on. And if we have, a few good men in any of these places that have faced these kinds of struggles, we can turn the whole tide, because so many other people think it's just a hopeless situation and you're just waiting for it to collapse in on itself. We can come in, fill that hole, and reconquer those fiscal territories and build private streets or private communities that we can protect our own in, and then extend that protection beyond those walls. Have a positive influence on whatever locality that we may occupy. And that was something that people really leaned into and started exploring more as we were discussing things in the event. And it is a large financial risk to take, and moving a bunch of people and securing properties and doing all of this work to secure something. But if we get the right people on hand, and yourself, Vincent, being someone who works in such a field, we could definitely achieve something like that in any of the avenues that people were taking. There's even another similar suggestion after the Old Glory Club panel, where it was an older gentleman in the crowd that was suggesting, with the creation of something like the Old Glory Club, which is a fraternal organization for heritage Americans, to be a mutual benefit society, much like the fraternal orders of old. And help those in our sphere, help our friends, but have an actual organized institution with legal backing and everything else behind us to really help our friends financially, security-wise, or by any other means that we can find. And also, make good standings for ourselves by doing, say, community service work or whatever else we can, as an organized front, much like these old fraternal organizations, or even secret societies like the Freemasons. But all of these former fraternal orders and secret societies are on quite the decline. And this older gentleman was suggesting that people infiltrate these societies, and once we get in a high enough position or good standing, work our ways to get the fiscal properties, or even many of the members, to join our side if we find that they're in alignment with us. So I find that they are friends altogether, and maybe not subvert those fraternal orders or secret societies entirely, especially considering some of them have done a lot of subverting themselves, say the conspiracies revolving around the Masonic orders, and those are well founded. There's a lot of historical precedent for that, but they're not all bad. There's a lot of good things that we can learn from or utilize with the institutions that they maintain. But taking many of those old and dying fraternal orders you see in any town, anywhere in America, and get that prime real estate that so many of them are sitting on. Some of these buildings being 200-300 years old, depending on where in the country you are. Myself, up here in New England, you see the Masonic buildings, or much newer buildings like those occupied by Rotary or Lions Club members, or even Knights of Columbus, but they're more the Catholic variety of things, and they're already friends for the most part, but still boomerish in mentality for most regards. And having men infiltrate these various organizations to, at the very least, point them in a direction that helps us instead of counter-signaling us in any way. And that would be a way to assist our own ends and means and goals. But getting the most out of it, we can just appropriate pretty much all of the infrastructure that they accumulated over the years and just use it for ourselves. And that was a suggestion that gentleman brought up, and that caused a lot of buzz and a lot of conversation. And people were even going up to him and saying, "Hey man, I like you. I want to buy you a drink. That was an awesome comment you made. I want to hear more about these ideas." And it was these ideas were all kind of buzzing around in at the front of people's minds to try and see what we can do and how much we can push to really get us over the hump that we may be experiencing right now in the mountain we have to climb against the technocracy before us.
That's very interesting, yeah, because I mean that sounds like a lot of the stuff that we've been saying for a long time. Is that we need to retake these institutions, and I never thought about subverting like the societies which have subverted themselves. Things like Freemasons. Or...
Yeah, I thought people were going to be very hostile to that idea because you don't want to stare into the abyss too long lest you let the darkness overtake you. Us being subversive or whatnot ourselves, but people were very welcoming to the idea because we do have to operate a bit like the enemies that we face because they are effective. That is, with the caveat of not being corrupted by power itself or so forth. So we have to be very careful in how we go about things. But people were very warm to the idea of, winning, not just sitting back and being, air quote, principled, as so many of the air quote conservatives would like to beat people over the head with, so that people aren't actually doing things against the wishes of the technocratic elite that exists now. But actually being effective in taking back our civilizations and societies from the elements of decay. And I thought that was a very good sign because men who are really willing to stick their necks out and do things like this is a very positive thing to see.
Yeah, and that that principled idea is just a kind of an excuse for complacency. Also, it's not a I don't think it's grounded in anything real. It's all rhetoric, and it seems to me that this event had a lot less of that. There was no rhetoric going around. Maybe there was in certain by transference of certain memes and mimetic pathogens or whatever they're called, but the idea of the event itself seems that there wasn't very much of that. There was a lot of planning and organizing and saying things for what they are. You know what I mean? Saying what you mean and not getting involved in any of that lower brow rhetoric. Wouldn't you say?
I would say there was definitely a use of rhetoric, but yes, not lower brow rhetoric, not just as the Buffalo Springsteen song goes, saying hooray for our side. It was a genuine inflection of poeticism that existed in the rhetoric that was displayed, especially in people's speeches like Dave Green, who just had a just amazing speech, received the first standing ovation of the event, which was then preceded by George Bagby's, which received the second and last standing ovation of the event. Both of them back to back, or not back to back speeches, but both of them being just amazing stories and narratives that they had of their own personal lives and of these metaphysical reflections that we're hitting with all this rhetoric, but driving people to action and direction, and not just existing amongst the bouquet of flowery language, but actually, dethorning the rhetoric that is used against us and arming ourselves with far more capable armament of tools to use in this fourth generational warfare that we're existing in. And it is a war of finance and of idea and of rhetoric to certain degrees, of optics and all these different factors. And we have to be much better at playing that game, because once we win, and we have to wage war on the grounds in which they're fought in the modern day, but once we win, then we can have a full revolution of the wheel and get back to how confrontation ought to be held, and not these subversive and sneaky fox-like ways, being conscious of them for anyone trying to do such things, but standing on strengths, not just relying on the illusionary.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too, is that it's like you said, anytime I would suggest something like that, taking some kind of subversive action, there would always be some pushback I received by, certain people saying that perhaps you would become the enemy yourself by using the same tactics. And to an extent, I can see why, because a lot of people lose that higher vision when they're in the nitty gritty. And, it's like I was saying, I mean, just off call, I was just saying that, the more time you spend around, like, the normies, quote unquote, or, just normal people, the more you become like them. Even if you are, quote unquote, enlightened, or, whatever, like we may be, very aware of these, quintessential truths, the more time you spend away from them, the more you become very lowbrow. The more time you spend away from them, the less you focus on them, and the more you focus on the immediate things in front of you. So I feel like using tactics like that to resubvert kind of poses the same risk. You get so caught up in the act of subversion itself that you lose that goal to which your subversion was ultimately working. And so that was the pushback I received. But I think also that with a good enough group, with a good enough doctrine, and a strong enough body of people, perhaps some kind of assembly that keeps things on track, it's much harder to lose sight of that vision. And of course, that requires something like religion, or requires something like at the very least a a certain hierarchical structure of sorts, to ensure that that Brahmin is on top, that philosopher king is there with the vision. You know what I mean? And so it seems like this room was full of that, full of the Brahmins, full of the philosopher kings, each being king of their own castle, willing to do what it takes, but also not losing that vision. So in the months that have followed, I guess in the month and a half that has followed, there have been certain actions that have been taken in order to establish these new groups and whatnot. Would you say that you feel, being involved in this, that people are losing sight of that vision and getting too deep involved in the nitty-gritty? You know what I mean?
No, I wouldn't say that at all, though it is too close to the event and the things we've discussed to say so at the given time. We're chipping away at things collectively, one piece at a time. We can't expect too much to happen in too little of time. We have to, do things by piecemeal, brick by brick, laying the foundations for a brighter future, as the call sign of the event was, and that is a wise thing to do. That way, we have we have a way of not tripping over ourselves or trying to rush to the finish line when the whole operation or modus operandi of our side is working a bit long term, having a low time preference, which is one of the terms that kept being brought up in the event, which is something I actually had to look up because it's more of an economic term and used very often with the crypto currency sphere of things. And there's high time preference and low time preference. High time preference being someone who wants something in the immediate, foregoing the consequences further in the future for an immediate payoff or some sort of satisfaction. And us operating in more a high time preference mentality puts things in order for multi-generational effects, so that it's not just the fight we live in our lifetimes, but the fight our sons and grandsons and great-grandsons might finally win and have a much more permanent establishment of order over the elements of chaos that we are up against.
So what are some of the things that have been done, some of the tangible results that have come about from this event?
Well, I mentioned the Old Glory Club panel, and that was a formation of last year's event, which was something that wasn't formally organized at the event last year. It was more of a idea that was brought up at an after party from the good vibes and feelings that were received from the success of last year's event. And now, formally, with all the founding members of the Old Glory Club returning to the event this year, they had a big panel to discuss what it was, what they wanted to see out of it, and what their hope for the future was. And New England came out strong in the Scyldings event. And I should mention that there are multiple Scyldings events as well. That's a detail I forgot about, because the Beowulf Society is an international organization, and there's Scyldings events so far in the US and the UK. So this was the US event, and you can find all the information online about what it is and how to get there and whatnot else. I just don't want to give out too many details unwittingly and risk people's security, including my own. But yes, the consequences of that now, the Old Glory Club coming together more formally this year, is now chapters being opened up across the country for men getting together and having this mutual aid society, this fraternity, this formal organization with proper legal defense and direction and history that we have shared in it being a very American organization with a Canadian sister organization, I believe, being in the works as well. And New England now, because we came out so strongly with the with attending the event, there is a whole New England chapter that we are organizing, and I believe we are going to be the first Old Glory Club chapter instituted in the larger umbrella of the Old Glory Club. And we have a good chunk of members. We have our officers. A lot of us there are even some people who spoke at the event that are part of the core of people that one of them I believe is one of the founding members, or first members to Old Glory Club Central that we have here in New England, and we're moving forward on getting things formalized and paperwork being taken care of and being a legally recognized institution. And I think that's one very positive leap that has occurred since the event, and that's only been a month and a half since everything's happened. So a lot has been going on in just that regard, but there's been an uptick in activity with people organizing in real life, with basket weaving. There's been a lot of formal discussions on the ideas that were brought about in the Scyldings event, much like I've already brought up here, but even that is just a tip of the iceberg of the conversations and ideas that were being passed around for these men of good character that have a lot of income and a lot of time on their hands. Not saying that they're like neats or millionaires or something, but people who use their time and money wisely that can get a lot of these things done. And things are still very much in the works, but the fact that they're in the works at all is a very, very good thing.
So, what are some of the practices and things like let's say I were to go to an Old Glory Club meeting, what should I expect?
So, at the heart of it, it is a mutual aid society, a fraternity, and a cultural, I guess cultural society is the best way I can put it.
So
it
I
is
guess what
specifically American. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, what kind of discourse goes on? You know what I mean?
Because we're the first chapter that I know of thus far, there's nothing that we really have done yet, but there's been a lot of ideas spitballed, informal organization and meeting up, in frequency of meetups, and that's like physically getting together, particularly of the officers that have taken on positions of responsibility in the organization, and that's on making sure that we have sources to generate money to save for emergency funds or to pay off for national events or organizations or things like that, paying dues to the Old Glory Club Central, so that they can take care of any chapter that might be in distress, and that way we have a centralized, organized body to aggregate all of the various satellite organizations and chapters thereof. It's mostly just a way of formally organizing so that we can get more local people together in getting things done and having backup plans if we were to ever face ideological or legal persecution by the state. And that also works in conjunction with things like New Foundings, which is a totally separate organization that's based in Texas on the idea of having people invest in venture capital for people who are antagonistic to the system. So you can find a network with people who can hire you or invest in a company that you're creating that isn't, woke, global American empire sort of pride flag garbage that won't force you in a position to pledge allegiance to some ideological or pseudo-religious type of initiation that you find morally reprehensible, or say you get fired for being against those things. You have a way of finding new employment or starting a new venture of your own through something like New Foundings. And the Old Glory Club is thinking of being in a similar position, though not formally or not entirely focusing on just that area of things. It's a little loose at the moment, but the visions of what we will be focusing on as an organization are getting a bit clearer as we move forward. But there's a lot of legal formalization that has to occur before we can actually get anything done.
I can imagine, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of paperwork that needs to get done, and I can't imagine it's easy having everyone be on different schedules in different parts of New England, because New England's a big place.
Oh, it's not just for us. There's the Old Glory Club Central. That's all around the country. People from Texas to Illinois to Missouri and Florida and some people in New England. So they're all in different time zones, let alone just a few states, a few hundred miles away from each other. Some people are thousands of miles distant from each other. But the bond of brotherhood is so strong amongst the men that attended the event, but also that are looking forward in organizing and contributing in the future, that they're willing to, cross oceans to help a brother in need if it comes to it. And that's something that is just deeply inspiring and moving that I witnessed at the event.
That's something I was thinking of too, is that the idea of reciprocity should be at the heart of every group that's founded, I believe. And so, when you say, was it mutual benefit or mutual
aid society?
Mutual aid society. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of exactly that, the idea of reciprocity. And I think it's good that now that there is some kind of working towards that. I know that you said it was kind of a footnote, made it an after party at the last Scyldings event. So it's nice to see that something has come out of it. And so I guess we can use this portion of the episode now to talk about the next Scyldings event. Do you think enough has been done after this one to make the next one more fruitful? What do you think? What are your expectations for the next one? I know it's a year out, but just.
Ooh, I have no idea. No one knew what they were going to get into with the first Scyldings event. I didn't attend the first Scyldings event, and I would have liked to have gone, but I was not in a position to attend. And even though the first one was quite a success, no one was quite sure how the second one would go down either.
So this is the second one.
It's just, yes, it's just building. It's kind of building off momentum. You have to make sure that we keep going no matter what happens, and figure things out as we go. Because once we stop or slow down or, start getting distracted with infighting or things like that, then our enemies will outpace and rout us. And that is the last thing we want to happen, because we've done so much so far that it'd be a travesty if we were to falter at this rate. So it's hard to say what will come about from next year or what the idea is for the next event, but whatever does come about is obviously going to be good, because like I keep saying, so much has been done already and so much is getting done right now and doesn't show signs of slowing down or stopping, that whatever comes about is only going to be a better standing for us when that time comes around.
So that's very interesting. So I think that one of the things that I would have hoped for this event would have been a more connected culture that is in the dissident right, or in the dissident right spheres.
Oh yeah, no, it was amazing because people were giving. Excuse me, I'm being a little inner city with my language right now. It genuinely was. Sorry to interrupt, because people were giving each other their personal phone numbers and personal contact informations, and being very comfortable with being connected with people on a much deeper level that risks their personal security a bit more, but there is that genuine trust and recognition
Right.
across people, that they're more than willing to do that. And that is a regard of personal connection, on an interpersonal and an institutional basis that definitely came out from this event.
So there wasn't like when you arrived there wasn't this kind of like wall that everyone put up where they were just kind of like, this person might be in this for nefarious means, or things like that.
Everyone went in with the idea that everyone there is a Fed. And I even go a step further in assuming that everyone is gay and or a Fed. Someone might double cross or stab in the back at some point in the future, and you never know who that might be. So that's in the back of everyone's mind in taking cautious steps forward. That's why there are so many of these safeguards. As I mentioned, it was one of the founders of the Beowulf Society, ESO. I don't know if he's one of the founders, but he's one of the frontmen for the Beowulf Society that spoke at the event as well. And he was explaining what they do with basket weaving and with everything else on selecting people to that they can trust to be more involved. And that's identifying people that are there as possible Feds, that are, more glowy than the average person, that are narcissists or people who are there for their own personal gain, the clout chasers or the grifters or so forth, making sure they keep them out of the way, identifying spurgs, people that are entropic within the systems of our organizations, and making sure that they don't distract anyone or cause further disruptions or friction amongst anyone from spurging out, and containing them, because they might still be useful in some regards, but they're just a bit autistic. And jokes like that were being thrown around quite often at the event, because we all kind of are in different regards. I even apologized on one occurrence to Ryan Turnipseed myself, because I felt like I had said something that might have come across as rude or inconsiderate, and I wanted to make sure that he didn't feel slighted in any way. And he told me I was all good, because he understood that the autism was high with everyone here in the event. And it was a quite nice gesture on, I think, both of our ends to give that understanding.
That's just, what to expect from a room full of high IQ young men, honestly, at this point. But
yeah. Oh, yeah. But there's always that caution there in the back of everyone's mind to make sure that no one is being is putting too much risk out there without having some sort of backup plan or safeguard in place.
Mm-hmm. So there wasn't any kind of like hostility, but it was just kind of like you could tell that there were some reservations.
For many people, yes, reservations, just to make sure that they're not going to be scammed out of their money, or they're not going to be in some sort of legal trouble, a la something like the January 6th protests or the Canadian trucker protests or things like that, which, were all very much on the mind of the Populist Delusion, which is one of the books they were selling at the event, of, things happen from the top down, and that these populists protests and things like that don't work because the people protesting are not being backed by those who are in power. They're protesting against those who actually do hold power. So bad things are going to happen to those people. And everyone else was very much under that understanding. So it is reservations in the regard of making sure no one's doing anything stupid, but not so much in the regard that you can't trust people who are also putting themselves in imminent risk. People who show their faces, people who have already put their money where their mouth is, are people that you can generally trust. And there are quite a few people there that had that very warm welcome about them. either being given or receiving, which was a very good thing to see.
So going back to what you were saying about the the populist protests not having any kind of fundamental backing, that reminds me of what Evola was talking about when in his essay, I believe it's called "Revolution from Above," or something like that. Well, that's the phrase he used in the essay. I just can't remember the title of it, but it was basically that the revolution, quote unquote, can't be brought about by these inferior forces. So like these populist organizations and things like that, they can't be brought about by this. They have to be brought about from above, from someone who is of the, not only of the upper castes spiritually, but of the upper classes which correspond to those upper castes. And so there has to be some kind of force that pulls things back up for this kind of quote unquote conservative revolution, which is another phrase he used, but that was more of like a German thing. But so I think that in this, the goal really moving forward would be to get these types of men into these types of positions to incite this kind of revolution from above, carried out by the foot soldiers at the base level. Would you say?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So then, in that case, the subversion of things like Freemasonry and things like that, as well as the subversion of certain businesses and economic institutions, I think is I don't want to use the word subversion, but the changing of the minds of the upper echelon, or perhaps the people,
or the seizing of the assets through some means of cajoling.
Mm-hmm. Exactly what they have done to take power in the first place needs to be done again, and that was something I think.
And how they're being misused through the occupation of various boomers, whether literal baby boomers or of the boomer mindset under, such boomer truth.
So I think that was it was the exact tactic that was brought about, or that was used to bring about this kind of situation that we find ourselves in now. The institutions were taken over. There was a revolution from above that was supported from above. I think that, getting off into the weeds a little bit here, you can kind of point back to that, the founding of liberalism as that, and then the regression of the castes into this kind of populist mentality to allow the populist, the populace to take over these institutions, to then, disintegrate the hierarchical integrity of society. But I think that it's going to be a bit different in our case, because it was kind of so my thought process is, right, that the bureaucracies that resulted after the institutionalization and centralization of various governments, right, and institutions and things like that, the bureaucracies that resulted from it was a result of the populist mentality and sentiment that was becoming popular at the time. So you would have these bureaucracies filled with a bunch of workers that are all working in unison towards this common goal. And it's kind of like flooding the institutions with a bunch of numbers, a bunch of people. You go from this feudal type of society ruled by maybe one man and his advisors, and then you go from that to this very large bureaucratic society ruled by a bunch of people who have authority over each other in various ways, and kind of get entangled in a hierarchical non-hierarchy, as I would put it. So I think that our situation in reversing that is going to look a bit different, because we can't just flood it with numbers. We don't have enough numbers to flood it with. We're going to have to be very strategic, in terms of what points that we actually hit. And I think that the goal going forward should be focusing on what points to hit. I think I would say that the next event should be focused on something around that. But, that would be my hope for the next event.
Yes. And I would totally agree, because the theme for this event was building a common foundation, and that very much was displayed on making sure that gatekeeping is in place, that petty differences that may occur don't result in squabbles or infighting, because we all have common enemies in this regard. And we've spoken about this on the podcast with answering the common questions for our sphere of things, like the neo-pagan stuff, or the boomer truth things, and things like that. Is we have our problems with those things conceptually, but any of the individuals that may identify with those religious or ideological hues aren't rejected, because they are still friends at the outset of it, given the common enemies we have and given the common goals that we're striving towards. And it's having the quality of those men working together that will make the difference, because as Academic Agent loves to say, the organized, from Paul Schmidt I should say, or Academic Agent loves to repeat, the organized minority always defeats the unorganized mass.
Mm-hmm.
And we are becoming a far more organized and far more tactical minority than the system will be able to deal with.
I fear almost, though, that people are losing their tenacity. And I don't mean that in any... So the thing is, right, for example, during COVID, people had a lot more time to kind of ponder these issues, and come to conclusions that they might not have come to if they didn't have time to sit there and remove themselves from their day-to-day lives. And I know, for example, that some people I met very recently have only come to these conclusions, or even come to, let's say, reading various authors like Evola or Younger or someone like that, because of the free time they had during COVID. Now that they're back in the workforce, or they're back living their lives, now that the restrictions have been lifted, the people, a lot of people are going back into their mundane lives, and they're, I think, removing themselves from being removed from society. So they're reintegrating back into this kind of normie mentality. Would you say that kind of seemed evident at the Scyldings event?
Not at all. In fact, many people were at the event and just after were very enthusiastic on working off momentum, just as I've stated before.
Right.
And I even stated so myself, because no one wanted to lose the energy that happened at the event, and it doesn't seem like people have, because of like the Old Glory Club being the prime example for this, and these things occurring. And even though the New England chapter might be the first official chapter of the Old Glory Club, there are requests and invoices being sent in on other chapters now popping up all across the country to formally organize with. And that means of organization is a very big step, because once you have that pocket of people in a certain location doing things regularly on a regular interval, then you have things changing bit by bit. And the more that these future victories might be secured by those little bits of changes happening through the actions or even just presence of these organizations or formal institutions, then the easier future wins will come. And that's something that Curtis Yarvin stated, and something that was repeated at the event quite emphatically.
Well, I think I've kind of exhausted all of the topics that I had written down. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I would just like to say that I loved meeting everyone at the event. There were a few gentlemen that are part of the Old Glory Club chapter that we've created now, who I attended the event with. Two of them I had already met at a basket weave that I organized myself, and then another one I met at the church that one of the gentlemen at that basket weave invited me to, and from there, the four of us got much closer together. There was a lot of camaraderie and deeper bonds felt with actual brotherhood taking place, and something that I feel like you and I have garnered over the years just through our digital exchanges. But once we actually meet in person, then I feel like those bonds will be deepened even more so. And having met all of these people that I've been following for years online that have helped bring me into the light to certain degrees was definitely a refreshing experience, because it wasn't just some sort of parasocial moment of awe. It was really getting to know someone as a person and just seeing them as a normal guy. Dave Green and Yiz the Eunuch probably being two people that had the most impact on me, Yiz being on the show and Dave being someone who I followed since he started his channel. And just talking to them and getting a hug from Yiz and meeting for the first time and shaking people's hands and nerding out on certain things like anime with Dave, and him even trusting me with his personal contact to keep in touch with him later on. It was something that was just deeply profound for someone who you might think is just some AI generated media piece of consumption for you to sit home and just digest and not actually do anything with. But now this is people that I've actually have some sort of relationship with, a real physical connection that I've made. And I think that is something that a lot of people would probably reiterate or agree with, that they experience as well at the event. Because not all of it was, raw politics or trying to beat the man, as it were, or, become some sort of pocket counter elite ourselves. Some of it was genuinely just kicking back with the bros, having a cigar, taking a drink, BSing, talking about all the finer aspects of life and the little things that matter. And that, I think, is probably the most important aspect of the event, because it lets us be human for a while, not just gamifying this pursuit of politics that we exist at within the paradigm we do, as this animal that we are, as Plato would put it, or not Plato, excuse me, Aristotle would have put it, us being a political animal. And as much as we are, it's removing ourselves from the political that makes us most human, because it's everything we can do to live the fullest life we can that makes the most meaning with our lives. And having these connections that we built, I think, brought a lot more meaning to everyone's life, and will probably assist in generating more meaning in people's lives. Because one of the things that I wanted to bring up as well was from the last event, there was two people who met there, a man and a woman, who returned at this event as an engaged couple.
Oh, that's very cute.
It was immensely cute, and everyone was very congratulatory to them. It was a very white-pilling thing to see, and hopefully they have, a good, healthy marriage and have kids, hopefully, and bring forth more positivity into the world as a prime example of it's not just all, politicking and power and just autismo rage raging against the machine, as it were. It is, building a better life for yourself and for your future.
Well, that's very nice. I'm glad to hear it, because, I think that one thing that you were, emphasizing greatly is the lack of human touch that most people experience, especially online. Like just something as simple as a handshake can make two people feel a little bit more connected. And a lot of the examples you brought up was like, a hug from me is a handshake from this person, or, sharing a drink with this person or whatever. All of these things can't be done over the internet. It's the nuanced things that help humanize your someone who is, should be your friend, really. Or is at least someone who's on your side. And that's what I think. I think that that's what helps to decrease the hostility and animosity between people. And, the what we experience online with these, like I said in the beginning, these profile pictures and macro images that represent entire people. And these, at best, walls of text that is the only way you interact with them.
Well, I'd say at best video essays for some of them.
Yeah, for some of them. You're only seeing part of a person with that. You're not seeing the whole person. And there's a lot more of a dynamic being behind that. There is someone who has the capacity to understand, well, let me not say that matter-of-factly, because some people don't, but there is, most of the time, as someone who has the capacity to understand these wider, complex ideas and notions that, if put into a professional environment, might be able to expound on it a bit better than if put into the mediums that social media has created for us. And that reminds me of a conversation that I was having actually with my mother. She was, we were talking about, I forget exactly what it was, but she made some comment that, social media doesn't allow for, actual conversations to take place. Even texting doesn't allow for actual conversations to take place. I guess maybe if you're on Discord or something, some kind of like chat hub or whatever, you can call people, and that is the one way. But for the most part, you're interacting with someone makes a post, right? And then there's comments, and then you interact with those comments and the post itself. You're not there. There's not like a real back and forth, because there's not time to sit there and talk about it, and you can't really hash out a fundamental idea. There's only hot takes on social media. No matter how well thought out it is, in video essay format, you're not having a back and forth. You're not having a dialogue. You're listening to this long 20-minute essay and then writing a comment that's 4 paragraphs long, and then there's another comment that's 4 paragraphs long. It's a bit more as formalized as it can possibly be. It doesn't have the same effect as though you were actually sitting there, figuring things out in person. And that reminds me of that conversation that you and I had about liberalism, for example, where that wouldn't be possible if we were not on a voice call. And that, I think, is amplified even further by being with somebody in real life.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think that's about all I have to say on this. I guess, I do think that we should probably, before the next event, I think we could maybe make another one of these podcasts kind of reflecting on the entire year, and how things have progressed, what has maybe fallen off, maybe some flaws in the mold, as it were, before we go. And
I think for Praxia and for our communities in a wider degree.
Yep. So we can do that before the next event, and then go to that one, and then do another reflection or something like that. But I think it'd be cool to do these at least, like twice a year, and see how it goes. But
or even better than a reflection is a request for any listeners or any people that we meet there to actually start putting our money where our mouths are, and getting these things done even more so than we had before. Not putting too much on our plate so that we can't do anything because we've over encumbered ourselves or because we try to get too much done too quickly, but to start having the rubber hit the road in a certain degree so that we're actual challenge to these institutions in a way that they can't quite handle anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's done, I think, very well through fraternal and personal bonds. So, yeah, absolutely. This has been the reflections on the 2023 Scyldings event. Hopefully, things will continue on the projected path, and we will have some fantastic updates later on. Thank you so much again, Cody.
As always, everyone.
If you are interested in finding out more about Praxia and the Praxis Society, you can feel free to check the description for our links. Our social media will be down there, as well as our Substack. And without further ado, my name is Vincent. I hope to see you back here next time at the Praxist Table Talks.